Let me clarify what current crisis we are going, because I think the youth is not even aware
Correct.
of their own mental models, because they need to take a pause, look at their own mental models of how they are living life, which is very colonized. So unless we decolonize, we will not be able to lead a life of mental well-being if we are using chemical fertilizers, right? And that food when we consume, apart from the fast food or the junk food, right? And why is the youth or even youngsters are getting into a disease zone? Because they really don't have a positive construct of health. Our normal school curriculum, the biology or anatomy that we learn, has nothing sacred about it. When we give Hitāyu-Sukhāyu as an index to the world, we are not just giving one more survey. That was never my aim.
Intention.
Right? But how do you change the perspective of what is a developing country, what is underdeveloped, and what is a developed country?
Namaste. Welcome to another edition of Sangam Talks with me, Pooja Porwal. Today we have Professor Mala Kapadia on Sangam Talks IKS. If you've ever looked at the global surveys of Well-Being and Happiness Index, you might have truly noticed a baffling paradox. India, that is Bharat, consistently ranks incredibly low on the happiness index. In fact, we are often showed falling behind countries like Pakistan and Bangladesh. When you read these numbers, it makes you pause and ask, are we truly unhappy as people? Or could it be that the prevailing metrics of well-being and progress are culturally biased and completely overlooking the indigenous way of living? So, today we are going to explore exactly that. Joining us to decode this, we have a special guest, Professor Mala Kapadia. She's a true visionary behind the Hitāyu-Sukhāyu framework. It's the first framework to define the measure and well-being of happiness. This is entirely based on Ayurveda and the indigenous knowledge systems of Bharat. Professor Kapadia, it's an absolute honor to have you today.
Thank you, Pooja.
So, I would dive directly into the crux of it. Why do you think these happiness surveys have gained popularity in the recent past? And why do you think these frameworks are failing to capture the civilizational state like Bharat?
To tell you very honestly, Pooja, just because people are very unhappy that we have started looking at happiness, right? Also, we have happiness ministries in various countries. We also have loneliness ministries in different countries. So it's very contradictory, right? The first happiness survey or happiness framework was proposed by Bhutan, a very small country, however very rooted in their own culture and civilization. And way back in 2008, Bhutan started the first survey. Even much prior to that, in 1975, the king of Bhutan actually echoed our own Bharatiya way of looking at life, where he said that the king has to look at the happiness of people. And therefore, gross national happiness is more important than gross development progress, right? Which is only economic centric.
Correct.
And therefore, they started this happiness movement, I would say, which soon caught up with the world. And obviously, there are various countries that have consulting firms that wanted to, take advantage of this gap of no happiness or well-being surveys in the world. And therefore, various surveys were introduced. However, if we look at the history of well-being and happiness surveys, they began with very incremental changes. So there is a difference between wellness, which is physical, well-being, which is emotional and mental, society, ecology, environment, spirituality. None of them were part of these surveys. It was more focused on how they define happiness, which is very materialistic, instant gratification, and pursuit of individual happiness.
Correct.
Right? So this was a very westernized way of looking what is happiness.
It had a very consumeristic view to it, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
So it focuses more on what you own, how you live, rather than how you're feeling or what you're experiencing. So I think that's what you're explaining. It's fascinating to see how this economic-centric view completely misses out on the human element. And that leads perfectly into your work. How do you explain, or how did you conceive this whole concept of Hitāyu and Sukhāyu?
Pooja, I was looking at what's happening in the world, and you would have also realized that India is shown as a very unhappy country, right? It somewhere feels like a conspiracy that if our youth thinks and feels that they are unhappy, then a lot of anti-anxiety and antidepressants can be pumped in the market, right?
Correct.
So it's everything becomes market-driven. And that's where I realized that we cannot be in a low in the happiness, world happiness indexes below Pakistan, Bangladesh, or even Ukraine, which was going through the war at that time,
Correct.
right? And didn't feel right. And also I realized, because I come from the field of psychology at one side and Ayurveda and yoga on another side. So I said, why haven't we as Bharat, one of the oldest civilization, we created our own framework. You know, we have different words, right? Like Ananda, right? Way back in Upanishad, there is Anandavalli and different levels of Ananda, which is far more superior than the Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Correct.
Right? And therefore, I was looking at various paths from our own civilizational wisdom. But what caught my attention was Ayurveda. I've been a very intense researcher in the field of Ayurveda for more than 3 decades now. And I realized that the basic definition of Ayurveda itself is a science that defines what is Hitāyu and what is Sukhāyu. Where Hita is simply, well-being or welfare of every being, not just an individual. And Sukhāyu is happiness, but happiness again is a wrong word for Sukha, right? Because when we look at Sanskrit words being translated, I am always reminded of Rajiv Malhotra ji saying Sanskrit non-translatable. Also, I realize that the other frameworks where they are not looking at life holistically, and they have different surveys to capture measurements of different things. While in Ayurveda, the basic definition is about meaningfulness, relationship, happiness, health, ecology, everything integrated in a whole.
Correct. We look at it more as an ecosystem as opposed to looking at it in isolation. I mean, this is more so from the youth point of view. Whenever we talk about Ayurveda, the first thing that strikes our mind is either diets, either herbal teas or going back to the herbs, or treatments like Panchakarma, which is more physical. Can you put light on the relationship between Ayurveda and mental well-being, which is more to like intrinsic to one's mindset?
Sure, Pooja. This is exactly where I realize that unfortunately, Ayurveda is seen as Panchakarma.
Correct.
Right? Or nutrition, diet, etc. But we are one of the oldest science that looked at how do you live life which is long, healthy and meaningful. So Ayurveda defines itself as a science of Hita and Sukhāyu. But when we look around, and this was during pandemic time that I realized that we are more leading the other life, which is Ahitāyu and Dukhāyu, right? And the definition of Ayurveda itself is beginning at a metacognition or meta-knowledge of what is life. So not just long life is important. Today when we look at the world where they have much more modern medical facility, the longevity has gone up. But what is the life, the quality of life of old people in different countries?
Correct.
It's very sad to see them in old age homes, right? Mostly in wheelchair or having Alzheimer, Parkinson's, etc. So Ayurveda is not just long life, but healthy long life.
Correct. the qualitative factor contributing towards the longevity of life as well.
Right. Which is the philosophy of Ayurveda, because Ayurveda says that you need to lead life, your own life, in pursuit of health. But why health? Right? Because in the West, health is absence of disease.
Correct.
Our rishis were not even looking at disease. They were looking at health as a positive construct.
Correct.
And that's where I realized that they connected Sharira, body, Manas, which is mind or mental well-being, Indriya, which is your senses, and Atma, which is consciousness. And they define that how do you see them integrated way, and how do you lead a life which is healthy for you so that you can pursue 4 Purushartha. Because Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha
Correct.
ultimately are seen as the foundation of human life, giving us meaningfulness. In the West, psychology has taken more than 200 years to reach what they call positive psychology. And I really feel sad that they look at positive psychology as, something new, a new branch in the field of psychology. While for us, Ayurveda was philosophy and psychology both.
Correct.
Right? So we didn't have this distinction. In fact, pathology comes much later. So Panchakarma is only a part of pathology. And the second aim of Ayurveda, the first aim is how do you keep healthy people healthy and happy?
You've pointed out the current crisis of well-being, the challenges that are faced. If the youth or our listeners have to pick one particular thing that they can start tomorrow morning that focuses on mental well-being, what would you suggest?
Oh, the first thing I would say, everyone need to read basics in Ayurveda, because, unless we teach, and that's where my entire project with IKS Division Ministry of Education on Hitāyu Sukhāyu as the first Bharatiya framework for well-being and happiness, it begins with education.
Correct.
Right? So I would say, see yourself in the light of Ayurveda. So what does Ayurveda teach us? Right? And before that, let me clarify what current crisis we are going, because I think the youth is not even aware
Correct.
of their own mental models, because they need to take a pause, look at their own mental models of how they are living life, right? Because we all have our belief systems.
Correct.
And which is very colonized. So unless we decolonize, we will not be able to lead a life of mental well-being.
Correct.
So I would say today, not just the youth, all of us as humanity are going through 5 E crises. Economic crisis, everyone knows it.
Correct.
Immediately becomes headlines in all newspapers. Your currency is devaluing, right? Or the countries declare recession. People are losing their employment, and everyone is aware of economic crisis. Right now also we are facing that. The second crisis is ecology, which is the climate change.
Correct.
And we all are experiencing climate change, right? Third crisis is that of emotions. Especially the youth need to understand that they have a lot of friends on social media. How many real relationships do they have in their life?
Correct.
If you want to open up your heart, why is the youth facing challenges of mental health? Because you don't have enough relationships that contribute to your emotional well-being.
Correct.
In fact, I'm a part of 6 Seconds. It's an international organization doing beautiful work on emotional intelligence. And their recent surveys say that there is emotional recession which is going on. We have only known of economic recession, right? But it's sad to know of emotional recession. So, economics, ecology, emotion. But where do all these crises come from? So, the next 2 E are very important. One is ethical crisis.
Ethical crisis.
Right? Because all the scams that have been happening, which have contributed to the economic crisis.
Correct.
And for us, when we look at this crisis from our Bharatiya perspective, it is the Dharmic crisis, right? Because for us, ethics means Dharma.
Correct.
Right? Dharayati iti Dharma. One that sustains you. So all the sustainability first principles which are given in our Shastras, including Ayurveda, they contribute to how do we come out of the ethical crisis. And all the 4 E crises have come because of colonized education.
Correct.
So the last E is education. So we need to re-educate ourselves into our Bharatiya frameworks, Bharatiya Shastra, Bharatiya Jeevan Drashti. Because ultimately mental models or worldview come from your Jeevan Drashti.
Correct.
And this is where Ayurveda I find is very simple because it explains to you who you are. Pinde te Brahmande.
Correct.
So the macrocosm and microcosm are not just interconnected, they are the same. And the youth may not be getting up early in the morning or sleeping early at night, but once they realize, and this is one thing that immediately they can do, base your lifestyle on the sun and the moon cycle. Right? Because the moment you realize that the sun outside also is connected with the Agni or the fire, the sun within you.
Correct.
And the moon outside is connected with your sleep cycle. Right? So that's what inspired me, in fact, to look at a survey. We had a large sample of about 800 people. We created a framework, we created a questionnaire. And we collected data. We benchmarked that data against, for reliability and validity, against international surveys. So there is a WHO 5 survey, there is a flourishing survey, and there is spiritual intelligence survey. And Hitāyu-Sukhāyu has a very high concurrent validity with all these 3 surveys.
Got it. Speaking of the colonization of our mental well-being today, the youth instantly identifies with terminologies like depression, ADHD, overthinking, imposter syndromes, and you talk about the Dharmic solution to it. I don't think we've come across any information or frameworks that will help solve for these challenges that they are speaking. And when you also mentioned about syncing your body cycle or your physical cycle with the sun and the moon, we've heard about diets like intermittent fasting, which also talks about, not eating food after maybe sunset, which was already taught to us by our ancient style of living. So how do you bring about awareness and acceptance of these frameworks that were already there as a part of our civilization earlier on?
Right, so Hitāyu-Sukhāyu framework has to spread, right, Pooja? We have to spread it from school level to higher education, to corporates, to parents, everyone, right? Because unfortunately, we are not leading Hitāyu or Sukhāyu. And we don't even understand how the soil, right? Because today everyone looks at organic food, but while I was growing up, there was no organic food because everything was organic.
Correct.
Right? So how do you see the connection between soil, society, so the mental health crisis at society level and individual level, and our soul or spirit?
Correct.
Right? So all 3 are connected. And therefore, if we are abusing the Mother Earth, if we are using chemical fertilizers, right? And that food when we consume, apart from the fast food or the junk food, right? And why is the youth or even youngsters are getting into a disease zone, right? Of all the diseases that you listed, because they really don't have a positive construct of health.
Correct.
Right? Colonization has taken away our self-responsibility for our happiness or health.
Correct.
Right? So we have outsourced both. You outsource it to others to make you happy. Right? So having large French fries and large strawberry milkshake, which according to Ayurveda is a Viruddha Ahar,
Correct.
which actually creates problems, but we see that as creating happiness. We also have outsourced our health to doctors, to pharmaceutical companies. Why do people need to take so many supplements?
Correct.
Right? Because we have lost that connection with soil. So only when we realize that we are made up of the same stuff, the Panch Mahabhuta
Correct.
and the Prithvi Tattva, right? So the Prithvi Tattva, if that is corrupted or if that is full of chemicals and toxics, how do we expect our own body and mind to be free of toxics?
Correct. In the hustle culture that people live today, how do you promote having a balance between spirituality and the physical aspect? How do you maintain work and your mental well-being to not fall prey to the colonized way of living on supplements, on fast food, or concept like cheat days and treating yourself with maybe, like as you mentioned, large fries and large mug or glass of milkshake?
See, this is where again Hitāyu-Sukhāyu, I will come back to Hitaayu and Sukhāyu, because Ayurveda very, very beautifully explains who we are. Unfortunately, we really don't know our body because our normal school curriculum, the biology or anatomy that we learn, has nothing sacred about it, right? It's just made up of atoms and, there is a stomach and there is a liver, but you don't understand how your liver and pancreas and stomach are interrelated.
Correct.
Or how do they work together. So Ayurveda gives us a very different anatomy, right? And when you realize that the cosmos and you are the same, and therefore in Hitaayu, the first, we had to club both the constructs of Hitā and Sukhā. Because Hitā is beneficial and the highest well-being or welfare, right? And it begins with the first competence, because I call them competence because way back our rishis have given us definition as combination of competencies of who is a person who is leading a Hitaayu and who is a person who is leading a Sukhāyu. So the first sentence in Hitaayu is Bhutanam Hiteshi, which means who has well-being of every being in the cosmos at the heart. Now imagine if this is the philosophy with which we live our life, then obviously you will not want to harm anything or anyone, right? And that ahimsa, that bhava of ahimsa will itself create the love for peace, right? The love for joy, the love for interconnectedness. And the first competence in Sukhāyu is about Sharira Rogena Anabhidruta, Manasa Rogena Anabhidruta, which means you are free of bodily disease or mental disease. And this is again, let me go back to the definition of Sukha in Ayurveda. Because Sukha, I said, is not happiness. Then what is Sukha? Right? Su means auspicious. Kha means space.
Okay.
So Sukha means living in an auspicious space. Now, where do we live? Of course, the first we live in our body, right? And therefore, you have to treat your body as sacred. You have to make it auspicious, right? The moment you make your body sacred and auspicious, you are going to the second space where we live, which is in our mind, our manas. Today, when we look at the youth and the food that we eat is not the only food which is corrupted. Food to all our senses, right?
Correct.
What is our eyes consuming? What is our nose consuming? What are our ears consuming? Right? Not just the tongue, but what is our touch consuming? In fact, in Ayurveda, I realized something very beautiful, that one of the very simplest solution to mental health for youth that you are asking could be a good hug from the mother or grandmother.
Correct.
You know, it's very unfortunate that most people grow up without grandparents at home. Parents are working parents. So I have been in human resources and I always used to joke that we are taking away nurturing moms from home. But we are then creating training programs to nurture managers.
Correct.
Right? Nurturing managers, nurturing talent. These are the programs offered. How do we bring a touching culture, a hugging culture back, because I have grown up in a joint family and there was always somebody at home just to even notice a change in your body language.
Correct.
Right now we don't see that. And therefore the loneliness and therefore this desire to or pursuit of happiness through only food or other means, which is actually not a right nourishment for your mind.
Correct.
And why is touch very important? Because touch is connected with skin, which is all over the body.
Correct.
Right? And touch is also connected with manas or mind according to Ayurveda. What do we do with a baby who's crying? You stroke hug the baby, right? Very simple solution. You don't have to go to the doctor or give any supplements of serotonin to the baby. These are the natural serotonin and melatonin which Ayurveda has prescribed.
Absolutely. I mean, there is a lot of unlearning and relearning required. It's sad to see that we come from a civilization that talks about ahimsa paramo dharam, but unfortunately we've forgotten our roots. My last question to you would be, how do you frame or restructure this narrative for Bharat at 2047?
Wonderful, Pooja. I mean, if we still have time, right? Bharat at 2047 is still 21 years away from us, right? And we have a lot of time to create that change. So we need to begin, and let me share two stories here, because when we relate to youth, stories are more fascinating than a theoretical or a technical framework. So we all know of the Daksha-Yajna, right? Where Shiv did Tandav because Sati immolated herself. Why did that happen? What does Daksha signify? And what does Shiva signify? Now, Hitā or Hitāyu is for Loka Kalyana, well-being and welfare of every being, right? Which is for us Shiva, right? And Shiva is not just a Shivling that you worship or, a huge statue of Shiva that you go and visit as a tourist. Shiva is the feeling of the highest well-being of everyone in your heart. And Daksha signifies, as you rightly said, the split between materialistic way of living and the spiritual way of living. However, in Bharat, they both are one. Ayurveda talks of Ihaloka, which is this world, and Paraloka, which is the other world.
Correct.
And you learn to balance both, right? So in Hitā, if we relook at the story of Daksha-Yajna, Daksha was showing off his wealth, the materialistic wealth, in the Yajna. And he had invited everyone who's who, right? And only Shiva was not invited. And Sati said, oh, my father's space, I don't need an invitation, I'll still go. And she goes. And she feels very insulted that she's not given respect. But more than that, her husband is not given respect. And she pollutes herself in the Agni. Now here, Shiva represents Loka Kalyana, while Daksha represents individual selfish pursuit of happiness, which is there in, certain countries. Pursuit of happiness is a constitutional right. But happiness at what cost is not clarified. So here we look at Hitāyu and Sukhāyu as a framework to guide us for Bharat at 2047, where every child is leading a healthy and happy life, where every child is a conscious consumer, right? I mean, many of the Indian households, even today, before we step out of the bed, there is a prayer that we recite is Samudra Vasane Devi, Parvatas Tanamandale, Vishnu Patni Namastubhyam, Padasparsham Kshamaswame. So the mountains are your breasts and the sea is your sari. So Mother Earth, please forgive me because now I'm getting out of my bed and I'm going to stand on you. Now, if you look at Mother Earth as a sacred unit in your life, right? You will not get into even your toothbrush. Do you use a plastic toothbrush? Or do you use a bamboo one? Or do you use from the tree, right? That's how we've grown up, chewing on a neem.
Name, correct.
Yeah. Because plastic would take 600 years to get disintegrated in Mother Earth. And therefore, the Hitā of Mother Earth is connected with our Sukha. So, Bharat at 2047 should have a lot of spread of the book that I have written, which is called Sukha Sutra, which gives Ayurveda in a capsule. That what metacognition, what understanding of who I am that I need. I shift from brain-based living to heart-based.
Heart-based living.
Right? Because heart is where your chitta or your consciousness is. Also, heart is a compass. Right? If you look at humanity, we have progressed a lot technically, outwardly. But if the compass is long, we can't reach a destination where we want to reach. So if Bharat at 27 is where we want to reach in a happy and healthy way, then naturally, including Ayurveda as a foundation of our life becomes critical. We also need to look at the policy and public health initiatives. So this is where I would like to share another story, right? This is actually a poem that I learned long way back in my school. In olden times, the kings would dress as a normal person. So nobody can recognize that he is a king. And go around, right? Go around looking at people and how they are living and if everyone is happy. And there was this king who left very early in the morning and he was going around the village and he traveled a little away and drifted into the fields. The sun was rising. He was feeling very thirsty. He looks around for water and he looks at a woman working, an old woman working in the field. It was a sugarcane field. So he goes there. He continues sitting on his horse. Because though he's dressed as a common person, in his mind he knows that I'm a king. And he says, I'm thirsty. May I have some water? And the old lady says, why water? I'll give you sugarcane juice. And she removes one sugarcane, cuts it. And when she cuts it, also the juice flows. And then she takes out the juice and hands over the glass to the king. The king, very inadvertently looking at the field, drinks the entire glass. But looking at the field, he's thinking, oh, the crop is very good this year. And I'm sure my praja, my people will be making a lot of money. I should increase the taxes on them. Right? Just a thought in his mind. Not even implemented, but just a thought. Gives the glass back to the old lady and asks for some more juice. She's very happy. See, in villages, Atithi Deva, guests are always welcome. So she's very happy. She takes out another sugarcane and cuts it. But this time there is no juice. The sugarcane is dry. And she keeps on looking at the sugarcane and Mother Earth in shock and tears rolling her eyes, And then she sits down. So the king is surprised at, why you worried? Take out another. Maybe this one is not a good one. She says, no, beta, you are not understanding. The king of our land has got a negative thought which is not suitable for us, for the praja. And that has taken away the essence or juice from Mother Earth. And now the king is shocked. It actually hits him very hard. He gets down from the horse. He touches the feet of that mother and says, please forgive me. I am the king. I did think of, raising the taxes, but now I will not. And therefore in Hitāyu-Sukhāyu, what I realized that Hitā, the Loka Kalyana, comes before Sukha. And especially for governance, public policy, right? It has to be aligned with well-being of everybody. And therefore, whatever policy decisions we take about public health, if it is during COVID or now or whatever vaccines we are introducing, should we blindly follow the West or certain individuals and trust which may not have Hitā of people in
General
mind?
people.
Or do we look at and create our own public health policies?
Ma'am, for our listeners, I would like you to throw light on how Ayurveda is more futuristic as opposed to it being just a civilizational history.
Thank you, Pooja, because this is one of the reasons I love Ayurveda, that though it's an ancient science, however, it is Sanatan. All our Shastras are a part of Sanatan Dharma. And Sanatan means eternal. So what was relevant before is also relevant today. Today, the Western medicine is also looking at 3P, predictive, preventive, and personalized. They have ultimately come from one tablet for everyone to they are looking at personalized healthcare. And Ayurveda was always about that, right? So
Correct.
you don't have one medicine for fever, but the same person having fever at different times could be prescribed something else as a remedy, right? And therefore I realized that Ayurveda is a larger umbrella. So in Hitāyu-Sukhāyu, we look at not just how do you live individually a happy, healthy life, but how do you connect with the environment around you? How do you look at the community? So in positive psychology, what I began talking about positive psychology being very new in the field of Western psychology, what positive psychology today calls as Parma model, or they are looking at, a mental well-being. But Ayurveda talked about this millennia ago, right? In a very, very holistic way. So we realize that it's not just my health, but the health of the plants around me, the health of animals and birds around me, right?
Correct.
And therefore, what our Prime Minister has now offered the One Health, right? One Health mission, one national One Health mission, right? Which includes plants, animals, and environment. Because one of the main reason why we are facing ecological crisis today, because we don't have any understanding of our own ecological belonging. Even environmental science or value education is taught in schools as a separate curriculum, right?
Correct.
But if you learn Ayurveda, then you learn everything as a part of one Shastra. And you realize that if a plant around me is unhappy, I cannot be happy.
It provides more of a holistic approach.
Absolutely.
As looking at it in isolation.
And also all the positive psychological constructs like temperance, anti-fragility. Temperance means managing your emotions and feelings. Anti-fragility is resilience. How do you bounce back, right? Or pro-social, which is connected with community or doing charity. So character and virtue, which were never a part of any of the well-being and happiness survey, were already a part of our Hitāyu Sukhāyu framework.
Correct.
So, do I help the needy? Do I help elders in my family and community? So, Vruddhopasevi. Am I spending enough time with elders who have wisdom?
Correct.
Right? And the character and virtues. So there is a metacognition. However, from metacognition comes your meta values. Right? What are the values? Or we look at values from heart, not just brain. So what are the values with which I'm leading my life?
Correct.
Am I spending enough time in nature? Am I spending enough time with elders and others in the family? Am I doing something for the needy around me? Or am I looking at only my pursuit of happiness? Right? And then comes meta skills. So unless I have a cognition which is driven by values, I cannot use those skills to become happy. So being Sukhā, being in the space of Sukhā, is a multi-domain, right? So it has battery of tests that we are using in this one survey. However, in future, because you are asking me about futuristic, in future, this one survey can actually become an index. To become an index, we have to work on it for next 5 years. So it's my call for action to the youth today, all the educational institutions or IKS centers who can take this project forward.
Correct.
Right? And create an index which we can offer to the world. Because as our external minister, as Jaishankar ji said, that it's time for us to be vocal, that we shape the worldview of not just us, but the world. So when we give Hitāyu-Sukhāyu as an index to the world, we are not just giving one more survey. That was never my aim.
Intention.
Right? But how do you change the perspective of what is a developing country, what is underdeveloped, and what is a developed country? Today we are seeing that all the countries that come as developed countries are getting or creating wars. Right? Which is so harmful for humanity.
Correct.
Which is so harmful for the planet. And this is another limitation of the Western way of looking at happiness. We cannot look at individual happiness or individual flourishing, which is the new buzzword in positive psychology, unless we look at planetary flourishing. So wars are not actually, they are taking us away from Hitā and Sukhā to Ahitā and Dukkha. When the pandemic happened, Pooja, my first instinct was to go back to my Charak Samhita, because for me that is my Bhagavad Gita. And I said, what is there in Charak Samhita, in Ayurveda, which will guide me and which I can help others, to take shelter into Dharma through Ayurveda. And I was surprised to find a full chapter on pandemic in Ayurveda.
Is it?
In Charak Samhita, in Vimanasthana, there is an entire chapter called Janapada Udhvamsa. Janapada is people, Udhvamsa is disaster or death for them. So what creates Janapada Udhvamsa? And I said, wow, this is so beautiful. And Acharya actually gives a framework.
Correct.
Which unfortunately we only see it as a sutra, but it can be created like all management institutions, leadership courses, love frameworks, right? So this framework says, okay, we are in pandemic, which is a Hitāyu and Dukhāyu. Why did that happen? So you go back in time. And when you go back in time, it says, oh, there was climate change. Now, Acharya doesn't use the word climate change, but Acharya Charak uses the word Vikruti in Prakruti.
Okay, correct.
Right? And that happens at 4 levels. It begins with air, and we all know we are in Delhi, right?
Correct.
And we all know how air is polluted. Jala or water. Water gets polluted. Recently in Coimbatore, we had unseasonal rain, but after the rain, there was acidic smell from the soil. So naturally, there was something not right in the water that rained, right? So the corruption or Vikruti in air, water, Desha, Kala. Desha is geography.
Geography, correct.
Now, when I was doing this research on Hitāyu Sukhāyu, I read a lot of Western literature. And I came across a book called Geography of Bliss. And there is this writer who says, oh, which are the happiest countries in the world? And let me tour there. And unfortunately, when he travels to these countries, he doesn't find anyone happy there. So that's another paradox of the Western frameworks or surveys on happiness. So Desha, which is one level, a geography, but another level, Desha means the Deha in which we reside.
We live in, correct.
Right? And if that gets corrupt, and which we are seeing, everyone is somewhere in an unhealthy zone or unhappiness zone, right? And then the Kala. Kala is time with T, with capital T, right? So it's Mahakala.
Correct.
Right? And we are seeing that in Kali Yuga, it is said that the Dharma is only 1/4. So in Satyuga, if the Dharma was flourishing at all the 4, pillars, now Dharma is standing only on one pillar. So obviously there is lack of Dharma, which has created all other Vikruti in Prakruti. Now, why did that happen? So you go back in time. If you go back in time, they say there were unethical practices, adharma. Now, unethical practices at individual level, business and society level, nation level, and the world level. And we have seen that, right? I mean, ethical crisis or economic crisis are all result of the Adharma and practices, pollution that we talk about, climate change that we talk about. Recently, I heard there was a fire breakout at Uttarakhand. You know, it's very sad. But again, the nature is responding to the crisis that we have created.
We have created for ourselves,
right?
yes.
So again, the Acharya goes back and says, why did Adharma happen? So Adharma happened because of greed, lobha. Right? And the story of the king that I narrated, that when there is lobha in individual psyche, and this is where psychology and living gets connected. And therefore, in our Shastras, we say lobha is one of the biggest enemy of humanity. So what do you do? Now, there is lobha, which is even creating wars, right? There is lobha for profit, which is creating unsustainable practices in businesses. So what is the shift? Of course, post-pandemic, the world has been talking about new world order, right? What do you do? How do you run the world, or how should we run as humanity? Because all our choices during the Industrial Revolution 1 to 4, right? Now they say we are in Industrial Revolution 4. But all these industrial revolutions ultimately have created Anthropocene, right? Which is creating disaster, not just for us, for the entire planet.
Correct.
So what is the new world order that Acharya proposes? And he says very simply, if Adharma is the cause, leave Adharma and get Dharma back in your life. But unfortunately, most of us are Duryodhan, right? We say, Janami Adharmam, Nachame Nivrittihi, Janami Dharmam, Nachame Pravrittihi. So the youth today, the focus, if we are looking at the youth today, this is exactly the dilemma that they are facing.
Correct.
They know this is not sustainable, right? They know this is not good for me. However, they don't know how to come out of it. And therefore, the only surrender that we can do is to Dharma. What is my Dharma? What is my Swabhava? According to Ayurveda, what is my Prakruti? Understand that and live life according to that.
Correct.
A simple example for the youth that you were talking about, most of them go for physical exercise or go to the gym in the evening, right? Now in Ayurveda, our heart is compared with a lotus, inverted lotus flower. Now let's connect the modern science, biomimicry, with Ayurveda, right? Biomimicry is imitating nature in whatever products we create, from airplane to anything.
Correct.
Right? Now, why did the rishis call our heart a lotus? How did they see the heart? They had no instruments. But if you look at the heart, it does resemble an inverted lotus. But it's not just the physical look of the heart. It's also the nature or swabhava of the heart. Because what does a lotus flower do? It blooms in the morning with sunrise and it closes its petals in the evening, right, with sunset. Therefore, the heart also loves to do the same. The heart becomes active with sunrise, when most of the youth are still sleeping, and the heart wants to close down, relax, rejuvenate, get back the energy that you have spent during the day by resting, relaxing, being with the family, slowing down. Unfortunately, instead of that, the youth goes to the gym. So you are putting so much pressure on a heart which wants to rest and rejuvenate.
A meaningful life isn't just a metric on the economic chart. It's the connection between the soil, society, and soul. Professor Kapadia, thank you for joining us today and sharing with us civilizational wisdom and setting the mandate for Bharat at 2047. And to everyone listening to us, thank you for joining us today on Sangam Talks IKS. Thank you.